Are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome everybody for joining us. I'm Alex Pusansky, President and founder of Impact Justice. Today's event is part of a series we call Impact Ideas. We created Impact Ideas as a virtual space for compelling conversations that help translate big ideas into impact. During each conversation, we explore the work that's needed to build the future we all want to experience in this country and how to create an impact that reaches people's everyday lives. Today's conversation is particularly timely and special as we move into the holiday season, a time when so many people are gathering around tables across the country, hopefully with loved ones and people they care about. During today's conversation, you'll hear from Leslie Soble, lead author of our new book, Eating Behind Bars. In fact, it's our first book. We're really thrilled and excited to be able to do this. As well as Tara, a really inspiring leader in the prison reentry space, and Joey, who helps support our reentry housing work here at Impact Justice. I'm now going to pass this on to Aishatu Yusuf, our VP of Innovation Programs, who will be moderating today's conversation. Thank you, one and all, for joining us.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much, Alex, for the introduction and grounding us into why we're here today. So as Alex said, I'm Aishatu Yusuf. I'm the Vice President of Innovation Programs at Impact Justice. Alex and I are also co-authors on this amazing book that we're talking about today. So I want to set the stage just a little bit about why we're talking about this, and then I'll introduce you to this amazing panel of teammates that we're going to talk to later today. So 1 in 2 Americans have had an incarcerated loved one. Nearly 2 million people are incarcerated in the US today. All incarcerated people are provided 3 meals a day. However, as criminal justice advocates, researchers, and professionals, it has baffled me, and IJ was once this organization, we had not taken a hard look at why the one thing that all incarcerated people have to do to engage that we had not talked about, and that is food. We all recognize the power of food in our lives. As Alex mentioned, as we look down the road at the holidays to come, they are all held at the center of food. As we think about some of our most important conversations and learnings and engagements, oftentimes they center on food. Yet, not until recently have there been a hard and expansive look at the experience of food inside of carceral spaces. So in 2020, we did a report that Leslie Soble also led, which was the title, Eating Behind Bars, a Hidden Food and Punishment, And in that report, we looked at what the experience of food was for people in carceral spaces. Originally, when we were creating that report, we thought it was going to be a couple of page memo to really understand the experience of food. But what turned out to be an idea of a memo really became a larger report because there was so much information and so many experiences that we wanted to highlight. The reason we even did the report is because there was a conversation that our president, Alex Pusansky, had with some individuals that were involved in the education space. And at one point, someone in the education space said, we don't want our kids to eat food as if they're in prison. And Alex asked the question, well, have you ever had a meal in prison? The person said no. Then Alex asked the question to himself, well, why do we think that people in prison should have the food in which you talk about? And that led us to building out what we thought was a memo and later became a report. And from that report, we learned a lot of things. We learned people's experience of why incarcerated. We learned about the impact of food when they were released. We learned about the impact of food on their families. We learned about the impact of lack of nutrition on their families on the outside and the people incarcerated. We also learned that so much of the food people were eating in prison was labeled not fit for human consumption. Oftentimes the food that was fit for human consumption was inedible. We learned about the extreme amounts of food waste. We learned about the dehumanizing experience that people had while eating food in prisons, from guards standing around to the loud noises to the food that was not nutritious. So what we learned from that report helped us build out our Food in Prison project. But what it also helped us know is that there was more to be said and more to do. And that led us to building that report into a book that you all have or hopefully have today that we're going to discuss. So I want to introduce you to our amazing panelists. As Alex said, Leslie Soble, who leads our Food in Prison project at Impact Justice and is also the lead author of Eating Behind Bars, Ending the Hidden Punishment of Food in Prison. Welcome, Leslie. We have Terah Lawyer, who's the president of CROP, an Oakland-based organization that provides formerly incarcerated people with full-service reentry support and training to succeed in market-driven careers. I'll also note that Terah Lawyer was also a team member at Impact Justice at one point. And then we're also joined by Joey Patagaduan. Joey is on our housing lab team here at Impact Justice, where he supports people leaving prison with finding and sustaining housing and achieving successful reentry. So welcome all three of you. So glad to be in conversation. All right, Leslie, I'm going to start with you as the lead author of this book and who really had the opportunity to dive into this information, both from a research perspective, but also from a perspective of talking to incarcerated people, their families, and also folks who work inside of prison. So I'm going to start with you. So we describe food in prison as an unseen crisis, which the book attempts to bring into the light. So Leslie, why should we be talking about this issue now? And what should we know about this issue right now?
Thanks, Aishatu. So I'm actually going to break that question down into two parts. So why should we be talking about it and why should we be talking about it right now? In terms of why we should be talking about it, as you mentioned, there are so many millions of people who are impacted by eating while incarcerated, by food that is served in the carceral systems in this country. I often tell people, if I'm on an airplane or somewhere random, people ask what I do. And I say, I research prison food. And people are, that's so interesting. That's, such a niche issue. And I think part of what's so interesting is that this really isn't a niche issue. The scope of the problem is immense. The statistics you just named, or even, in the book we talk about, if incarceration were a city, it would be the 5th largest city in the United States. And that's not even including people who have since been released. So, why are we talking about this issue? We're talking about an issue that impacts a huge number of people in this country that has yet to really be given space in a national conversation. And why are we talking about this now? As you also mentioned, food is something that we all need to have to survive. It's something we all engage with every day, and that doesn't change just because someone is incarcerated. And food is a big part of our national conversation now, not just because of, we're approaching the holiday season, everyone wants to talk about what they're having for holiday dinners with their families, but also because of the situation that we're in, nationally, globally, when it comes to food. There have been a lot of conversations recently about food access and food security. Who deserves to have good food available to eat? The answer should be everyone. There's been a lot of information out there recently about nutrition and health, everything from the growing food as medicine movement to the idea that ultra-processed food is bad for us. In fact, there was actually a couple of articles that came out today that were talking about 3 new studies, the largest studies so far, that have shown that ultra-processed food is actually bad for every single system in the human body. And there's also a growing interest in local foods, in foods that are climate friendly, in foods that have some sort of social impact for, supporting local communities, things like that. So really, all of that taken together, this is a very important issue. And when we're looking at the food that's actually served in prisons, and I'll let Terah and Joey both talk a little bit more about that from firsthand experience, but when we're looking at that food, we know that this food is sometimes unsafe. It's often inedible. It is the kind of diet that we're all told we should not be eating. Very high in ultra-processed foods, refined carbohydrates, salt, sugar, very low in critical nutrients, the kinds of fiber and other things that are good for our bodies, good for our minds. And so when we're talking about this, this is an issue that really impacts all of us and really impacts the safety of our communities and the safety of our country as a whole.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I think one of the important things that you said to me there, and I really appreciate the distinction, is that people often see this or say this as a niche issue, and it shouldn't be. I think, again, part of the reason I said in the opening was the thing that everyone does in prison is be provided food. I don't say eat food, right? I say provided food because they are given a tray of food, right? Whether that's healthy food, nutritious food, that's a different conversation. We'll get to that later. But I think the conversation is this is the thing that happens every single day to every person that's incarcerated. And to categorize this as niche or small is just not looking at the entire picture or the big picture of actually how big this issue and this conversation is. So I appreciate you creating that distinction of that. You also talked about deserving of food. And I think that as we like to, I agree with you, everyone is deserving of healthy food. But the truth is in prisons and other places in our country, everyone doesn't have that food, which demonstrates a conversation, which demonstrates who is deserving and who is not, and how food is used as that. And I appreciate you creating that distinction as well, which leads me to my second question. And Joey and Terah, I want to go to you for this. So in the book, and also as Leslie mentioned, the book reveals how food in prison functions as sustenance, but also as a means of control. I did a conversation a few weeks ago with some individuals that were formerly incarcerated, and they talked about the fact that the food that they received in prison was just enough food to keep them alive. Right? It wasn't food to keep them healthy. It wasn't food that they want to eat. It was just enough to keep them alive. So Joey and Terah, I'll start with you. You both lived inside of that system. So can you talk a little about what that looked like for you day to day? How did it affect your sense of dignity, of health, and of hope?
Yeah, thank you so much, Aishatu, Leslie, Joey. So happy to be in space with you to talk about this heavy issue. I think, I know for sure that in the 15 years I spent inside of prison, my relationship with food dramatically changed because of the conditions inside. And initially, really trying to focus on multiple different aspects of prison. Food is usually what we find is the most enjoyable part of our day, is sitting down and having a meal. And my experience in prison completely turned on its head. It was almost like I was dreading getting my meal because I did not know what it was going to consist of. And I definitely knew that it was going to be overprocessed or maybe undercooked. And the chances of getting sick was beginning to become the norm. And so having hunger pains and then being provided food and not being excited about sitting down to eat a meal was a trauma in and of itself. And so it was very quickly understood to my physical being, my nervous system, that a meal coming up inside of prison was going to be something I had to push through and stomach through, figuratively and literally speaking. I experienced a lot of health issues, which we will obviously get into as the residual effects of food plays out, even up until this point. But my day-to-day experience was one of dread and, quite frankly, harm.
Thank you for that, Terah. I think what was really interesting, and Joey, I'll hook it to you after, is your relationship with food changed, right? I know you were in your late teens, I believe, when you were incarcerated. So you had a long time to create a healthy relationship with food. And then when you were incarcerated, that healthy relationship, what I assume you're saying, went from a healthy relationship to a relationship around dread and pain. Thank you. So Joey, I want to kick it to you. What was that like for you on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you for sharing, Terah. Well, it's, for the most part, like living in the moment. It's in the 23 years I was there. For a lot of it, I just took it for just the way it was. And, it wasn't right. A big part about, growing up in a family, in a community, is like breaking bread with one another, right? That's where people come together, where we share meals. And, when the food served was particularly unappetizing, when it wasn't enough, and especially on holidays, it brought home the fact that it just wasn't a humane way to live. Dignity, health, and hope, it took all of those things away in one way or another. It's the food we were given while incarcerated took so much of that connection and joy away from us. It's like personal experience. Like, I worked in the culinary department for a long time, right? I wasn't a cook. I was like doing procurement, but like I saw the way that the food was treated in preparation. And because of that, like on top of it being unappetizing, even the stuff that may have looked edible, I knew how it was prepared, and I refused to eat it a lot of the time. I went hungry a lot of nights because I'm like, I just don't want to risk getting even more sick by eating some of this food.
Thank you, Joey, for sharing that. And that's been a sentiment that we've heard from a lot of people that we've spoken to over the course of these few weeks while talking about this book, which was how often some folks went hungry because they didn't want to eat the food. We also had some individuals that we met a few weeks ago that talked about that when they exited prison, went into becoming a chef into food service because they never wanted to experience the food they ate in prison again, and they never wanted anybody else to. So I think that your experience, unfortunately, is not unique for the individuals that are in prison, but I think many feel that. So thank you for sharing that with us. So I want to stay with you and Terah for a little bit, Joey. And Terah. So as the book reveals, incarcerated people are forced to survive on food for decades that the rest of us have been told not to eat, right? Leslie mentioned this early on, food that's high in sugar, in salt, that's a lot of carbs. We're told, every day, actually, foods not to eat to remain healthy for the rest of our lives. But people in prison are forced to eat those meals, which means the harm of prison food ripples out into our families and into our communities, and even into our public health systems. So Terah and Joey, I'll start with you this time. You both have been steeped in reentry work. Terah, you're the president of CROP, and Joey, you've worked with many, many individuals in the reentry space with the Housing Lab at Impact Justice, but even before that. So can you reflect on what these ripple effects look like for both the people that you work with, and even if you want to give information about how the ripple effect impacted you and your community as well? So Joey, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, human beings are creatures of habit, right? Like we do not necessarily what's best for us, but a lot of the time we fall into habits that like we're comfortable with, that we've grown accustomed to. And a lot of the food they had inside, the food was made to like meet caloric intake, right? So it is ultra processed. It is full of sugars, right? So upon release, a lot of people that I've worked with, I'm even speaking for myself, we get out and, all of a sudden we have access to like all this food, right? Even healthy food. But, what's fast, what like tastes good, and what's cheap, it's the fast food. It's the junk food. It's all those things that like, we had thought about all those years inside, like, I can't wait to eat a burger, or I just got a quarterly package and I got a bag of chips. Now I can have as many chips and as much ice cream as I want, not just once every few months, right? So it's that ripple effect of like these habits, and they just snowball because of the access that people have nowadays. And that on top of like so much of the people that have been incarcerated since their teens, right? Nobody taught health classes. Nobody taught us how to eat, how to prepare our meals. So many of the people I work with in reentry, they had never actually cooked a meal for themselves. So they had no idea where to start. And sometimes it's daunting, that on top of finding a job, finding housing. And it's like, I'm going to put all those other priorities first. And you know what? The food, I just need enough to keep on going. So I'm going to stick with the fast food. I'm going to stick with the junk food because it's something I can do right now because I have other things I need to worry about. And like ripple effects into the communities, it's like, a lot of the people I know, they start families, right? And, kids, they end up doing what their parents teach them to do, which is fast food. We're just going to get takeout. We're going to do all of these things that don't have like immediate tangible effects, but affect us much later in life. So, it's affecting generations.
Thank you, Joey, for that. And Terah, I'll kick it to you just 1 second. One, I want to remind the audience, if you have questions, please drop their questions to the Q&A so we can answer them at the end. So please do that. And then the second thing I want to say is, Joey, I feel like every time I do these, we need like a glossary for people. So Joey mentioned a quarterly package. And oftentimes what that is a package that either family members or individuals and communities, community-based organizations send a package packaged to people in prison that consist of different things that they may like on the outside, can also consist of money that they put on their books. Another thing that might come up in this conversation is around commissary. What commissary is a store inside of a prison, and if individual is lucky enough to either work while they're in prison or their families put money on their books, they can buy things from commissary. And what Joey mentioned is a lot of times what happens is people are craving that thing that reminds them of home, or that thing that actually tastes good. And oftentimes, unfortunately, because the food that's served to people is not nutritious or tastes good, they often use the dollars of commissary if they have the opportunity to buy chips or to buy ramen or to buy things that, as Leslie said, we're supposed to stay away from. But because they're searching for that idea of something good or tasty or remind them of home, they often resort to the thing that is also unhealthy. So thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Joey. And Terah, you have a smile on your face. I feel like you're either identifying what Joey's saying, or you're remembering something from your past. So can you tell me about the ripple effects and how that impacted you and your community and your family?
Yeah, I just want to tug on that thread a little bit around commissary, canteen, and care packages or quarterly packages. It's important for the audience to know that that is like elite status if you do have money on your books, if you do have people that care for you in the community to provide you with those items. But let's us not forget that those items are also still packed with preservatives, because they are things that have to have a longer shelf life. So we're looking forward to pouched foods that are overprocessed, bags of chips, and dried noodles and things along those lines. And so even if you are able to sort of purchase items for yourself and maybe get a little bit healthier, we're still talking about foods that no one should eat on a regular basis to sustain their health and their nutrition. I'm also thinking about something I didn't add in my first statement, which is the psychological effects of the food exposed to in prison. At one point in time, I psyched myself out by using gratitude to swallow the reality of the food I was eating. And what that means is I was telling myself there are children in the world starving that would love this meal. And that was the way in which I psychologically positioned myself in order to eat and consume the food, was through a position of gratitude, of not being picky, like literally was psychologically punishing myself, like, don't think too grand of yourself. And that is something that, thinking about retrospectively in a professional field that is now where I'm now able to shape reentry programs that help infuse people with worth and dignity, I'm reflecting on how psychologically I played myself to not only devalue myself and saying like, this is absolutely what you're worth, but also think about people who don't get it at all. And trying to use the worst case scenario to compare against my own situation just so I can swallow the food. So I was reflecting on that. I wanted to like sort of put that out there, because not only was there physical effects, but there was also emotional and psychological effects. Joey, I think you touched upon the emotional need to connect and really sit down and break bread. And that was another thing that took place inside of prison as well. But having a very limited menu of items translates into a mindset of scarcity out here into the community that we see time and time again with people coming home from prison. For myself personally, I was overwhelmed with so many options that I couldn't even make a choice on what to eat. I could not make a choice on how I could sustain my own health by putting food in my body, because there was way too many choices and there was way too many factors concerning the health of food. Do I go organic? Do I go, is 2 days too late past the expiration date? Because I ate a lot of expired food inside. So all of these different things really affected, and I lost weight coming home. Well, the majority of people coming home from prison now have a plethora of options before them, and they overeat as a result of gaining a lot of weight upon their release. We see that as well. And then we see the other side, which is what I experienced, which is I couldn't eat because there was too many options. When I think about individuals coming into the reentry space and how we are setting people up for success to reintegrate back into society so that they can lead a life without crime and lead a life of independence, and one that is charged with agency, we look at some of our reentry service providers and think, what are we doing to really help promote people to not only supply their own food, but also know how to prepare it, educating them on what their body needs. So when we built out sort of our model here at CROP, it was really important for us to get away from sort of the commercial kitchens or the cafeteria style approach to food, so that people can choose what they want to eat. And we do that by providing them with a grocery card, getting them exposure to cooking classes so that they can not only learn how to get up, prepare their lunch, get their food ready for dinner, do all of these things, but also integrate that with activities leading to an independent life, right? So going to school, going to work, going to, your doctor's appointments, you have to organize food around that. And that was part of my problem. Was I lived in a system that had my entire schedule mapped out from when I wake up, when do I work, when do I eat, when do I go to sleep, when do I have leisure time. Coming home, we have to make sure we're creating a incubator where people can design their own sort of style. Not everyone wants to eat lunch at 12. Not everyone wants to eat breakfast at 8 a.m. So being able to create that freedom of choice for our fellows was really, really important. And I think as a standard across reentry systems and the ecosystem of itself, that is something that we should be doing, because we're all very different. The only thing we have in common is that we're formerly incarcerated, but we were all exposed to the same food system, which is continuing to have ripple effects. I mean, I'm a mother now. I have a 15-month-old baby, and I see some of that ripple effects coming through from my trauma in prison, where all I'm doing is paying attention to his cues that he's hungry. And then food is ready at the quick, because I never want him to feel a hunger pain in his entire life. And that's really deeply troubling. And so such a depiction of how food in prison really impacted me as a mother.
I appreciate that. You and Joey mentioned that people come home and start families. And because when they're in prison for a long time, oftentimes when they're young people and they age in prison, they're not provided the information of what nutrition is, how to cook, what that is. What they understand in prison is this is not it. This is not healthy, but they don't know they don't know what the difference is. That led us, I'm really glad that CROP does so much of that work. That also led some of the programming that Leslie leads around our nutrition ed workshops, because we recognize that people leaving prison had no idea how to make a meal, how you have a balanced diet. There was no information on that because they're not taught that in prison. They're just given food that oftentimes can be the counter of that can hurt their diet and hurt their nutrition. So I appreciate both you and Joey talking about what it means to come back into community and take what the experience you had in prison and put that on your families and on your children, and how you think about that. We were in a conversation with David Rosen in Washington, D.C. It was actually our book launch day. And David was talking about the scarcity model and how I think he was either now or he's talking about in the past, you look in his cabinet and he has a ton of coffee. Right? Because he knows that he can afford coffee. He knows he can buy coffee now that he's out, but so much of the experience was around scarcity that he was like, I got to get it all because I don't know when I can get it again. And I think I think that's partially what you're talking about, Terah, which is like both the scarcity side of it. And so you indulge it all and you don't have an understanding of what will come later because of what you experienced in prison. So I appreciate that. Leslie, you did a lot of research on this in the report and for the book. Do you have anything to add to this, what you learned from people in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many levels that we can look at these ripple effects, and Joey and Terah, you've both touched on several of them. I think, the public health aspect of this, people are coming out after having eaten this diet that is harmful to people's bodies, to people's minds for years and sometimes for decades. And they're coming back into the communities, and their parents, they are, children, their siblings, their neighbors, their colleagues, and if those people aren't coming back in the best physical and mental shape possible, then they're going to have trouble thriving and being part of those communities and showing up in the best way that they can. And when they've got healthcare costs coming in, back in the community, those costs then are having to be paid out of taxpayer dollars, right? Your taxpayer dollars are paying for prison food. Your taxpayer dollars are paying for folks' healthcare when they're coming out and they're not in stable and good physical and mental health. I think, Joey, you touched upon this idea of people sending quarterly packages into the prisons. And Terah, you talked about how expensive that is. And, it's only folks who have families on the outside who can afford to send that kind of support in. But a lot of times those families on the outside, right, they're deciding, do I keep the lights on? Do I feed myself? Or do I support my loved one who's on the inside? And when especially you've got, it's very often women on the outside who are supporting loved ones who are on the inside, and having to decide whether, your child or your partner or someone is, able to access food, have enough food to fill their belly, have enough food to satisfy and fall asleep not starving. That those are difficult choices that families on the outside have to make, that, they're losing not just the family member, but also losing the ability to care for themselves financially on the outside as well. I think also there's, something that we don't often talk about is the environmental impact of prison food. So much of the food that's on the inside just gets dumped. I've visited so many facilities where I've watched people in the food lines, like going through the chow hall or in the unit, and they've got a tray and they'll maybe take one thing off of the tray and then just walk over and dump the rest of it in the trash because it's just simply too gross to eat. And all of that food builds up, and we know that food waste is a huge problem in this country. And I think the statistic is that there's over about 300,000 tons annually of food waste that is created just inside of carceral facilities. And that's probably a low estimate. So that's getting added to the rest of the food waste in this country that's, causing rising greenhouse gases. It's wasting all kinds of land and water and human energy and effort to create that food in the first place. And then it goes straight back into the trash. So we've got, all of these different impacts. And then, again, just that lasting impact. Terah, we were reminiscing about this the other day, but you were the first person I ever interviewed about this topic. And so many of your stories have really stuck with me. And just that sense of feeling devalued by the food and having to change the way that you think of yourself because of the food that was served. And then that's the mindset with which people are coming back into the communities. And that's not the way to build a healthy community. That's not the way to build a healthy society. We should be showing people that they have worth and they should be valuing themselves, and really, taking that into account and using that to build stronger societies, not to release people in worse shape than they came in.
I really appreciate that, Leslie. And, I think one of the things that Terah and you mentioned and Joey mentioned is the idea of quarterly packages and commissary. It is absolutely ridiculous that there is, and as Terah said, that the folks who get the folks that get quarterly packages are folks that have money on their books, right, are a select few of individuals inside of a prison, right? They're the people that have families on the outside that can sacrifice to be able to do any of that. And to eat three healthy, nutritious, good food, good meals in prison, right, is a right. It should be a requirement of the prison. It should not be something we rely on the outside, your families, to the elite few that can get those, the reliance on families to be able to provide for you to get something that tastes good, for you to get something that you can stomach and keep down and not go hungry, particularly because those things that you're purchasing are not things that are around your sustainability for a long time. So I appreciate you both for bringing that out to us. As a reminder, everyone listening, please write your questions in the comment section on whatever platform that you're on. There's a comment section you'll see there. Please write whatever questions you have and we'll get to them in just a few minutes, actually. So thanks, everybody. Leslie, I'm actually going to stick with you. At Impact Justice, we are an organization that believes in we believe in doing something. We believe in thinking about how we take a problem that we see and working with our community and folks impacted to change the framework and change what we see as a problem in our system. As an organization, we do that through a variety of ways. I've worked with Terah a long time and I work with Joey, so I know they also believe in the idea of optimism and how we change a problem from being a harmful problem to being something that we can fix as a community. So in the book makes a powerful case for shifting from a punitive to a more restorative framework when we think about food in prison. So Leslie, from your perspective, what is it going to take to change how food is sourced, how it's prepared, and how it's served in prison? And then the second piece of that is what barriers stand in the way to achieving those things?
Yeah, I think the first sort of big barrier and also the first step is just a lack of awareness and raising that awareness. Number one, that this is an issue, right? So many people haven't even really thought about the profound impacts of food that are served in carceral facilities. They think of food as just, calories and basic nutrients to keep you alive. Um, there's amazing research being done out there on things like the relationship between food and substance use. We know that about 80% of people who are incarcerated struggle with substance use, and the prison diet, which is high in sugar and refined carbohydrates, is actually feeding people's cravings. It's fueling those cravings for substances, and it's causing harm in the body in ways that perpetuate those cravings and that reliance on harmful substances. And the reverse diet, one that's high in fresh fruits and vegetables, nutrient dense foods, high in fiber, low in sugar, that kind of diet can actually help the body heal from substance use. So really, diving into these various topics and things like nutrition in youth, we know that over 2/3 of people incarcerated in state prisons were locked up before their 18th birthday or 19th birthday, I think, right? And we know that people's brains aren't fully developed until they're about 25 or 26 years old. So we've got this huge chunk of the incarcerated population that is being fed food that is actually detrimental to brain development and to teaching people or supporting people in making good decisions and really learning and growing into the best person that they can be. We're feeding people in a way that actually prevents that from happening. So I think number one, just raising awareness about the profound impacts of food and teaching people what a really good, nutrient-dense, nourishing diet can actually do when we're talking about things like rehabilitation and preparing people for personal growth and returning to communities. Number two, I think the next barrier that we need to look at is the attitudes towards people who are incarcerated, right? We have this sense in this country, this obsession with punishing people in the sense of, oh, someone did something that caused harm, let's lock them up and throw away the key. And unfortunately, that's something that obviously isn't working very well for us. But again, for folks with loved ones on the inside, those are people's parents, children, siblings, partners, neighbors, friends, really trying to shift those attitudes so that we are rooting our policies, our practices, our systems in care, in actual care for our fellow human beings. And I think if we shift that attitude so that we're rooting our systems in care, right, there goes a huge barrier right there, this idea that prison food should be bad, that we should be punishing people, and provides huge opportunity to do something different. If we look at, again, like planning menus for people that are really providing for better health and wellness, both physically, mentally, emotionally. If we take a look at shifting to providing good ingredients for food, values-based procurement, buying food that is aligned with good environmental practices, supporting local economies. This is happening already in schools and hospitals, and it's something that we are really trying to push for when it comes to prisons, which are often the largest purchasers of food in any state. Care would mean shifting budgets to allocate more money for food, more money for supporting people's wellness, rather than just simply adding more barriers and more security features. Because we know, again, like people are safer when they have enough to eat. Our communities are safer when everyone has the resources that they need. And then I think also looking at who is providing this food. Often prison kitchens are being run by people who don't really know how to cook food. They are more experts in security than they are in preparing a good meal. So really making sure that the people who are running facility kitchens know how to prepare food that is safe, that is actually nourishing, that is appealing to people who are eating it. And at the same time, allowing people to interact with food in a way that is reflective of actual human nature, right? Our desire to interact with food and share food and gather around food. And as Terah was saying, eat when your body feels like it needs it. That doesn't change because someone is incarcerated. So allowing that human nature and making sure that people have the right to interact with food in ways that they should be able to. And then I think also just aligning all of those things with real mechanisms for oversight and accountability, which is something that is severely lacking in the systems that we have today. On the outside, we have the health department, which can walk into any restaurant at any time and shut it down if the food that it's providing isn't safe. And unfortunately, we don't really have an equivalent of that with carceral systems. So really making sure that there are people outside of these systems who are genuinely looking at the food that's being served and its impacts on people and making sure that it is safe, that it is healthy, that it is actually contributing to people's wellness. So yeah, multiple levels of barriers, multiple levels of things to do for change.
That's a lot. I hope everyone took notes because you gave so much information there. So I have 2 more questions for you. One more question for the group, and then I want to ask a question to Joey and Terah. And this is because you both spoke about having to transition from being inside to being outside in relation to food. So can you both just give me a sentence or a couple of sentences on what helped you make that transition around food, from being in prison to coming into the outside, whether that was to the food on the tray, becoming healthier, whatever that was. What was something that helped you make the transition from the inside to out, from the inside to the outside around food? Terah, go.
All right. It is definitely rebuilding a relationship with food. And I was able to make that transition through people, through community, connecting, redefining those connections associated with food really helped me get back to my natural habitat, my inclination of this is what I remember. Muscle memory came through for me. That was how I made the transition. Still, there's some residual stuff that comes up, but it was definitely through people and community.
Joey, what about you?
Much like Terah, it was finding that community. When I got out, I was on a really bad diet for a while, but really being able to connect with people, I was determined to teach myself to cook, teach myself to bake. It's I love to eat, but I find real joy in making something and serving it to others, and feeling that connection and seeing the joy on their face when it's an indescribable feeling, and I find a lot of joy in it. So I mean, just reconnecting with not only other people but myself and the food. So
yeah, and unfortunately for everyone listening, you don't get to work with Joey like the many of us do, and so you don't get to every week walk into the office and get a new Joey cookie or baked good that he's made for us. And I have always recognized the importance of how and why you do that. I love that you love cooking, but I also recognize that it's such a departure from the experience that you had while inside, so it makes that cookie taste even more delicious sometimes. So thank you so much. All right, I have one more question for all of you, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience that are listening. As mentioned, the organization at Impact Justice, we really believe in optimism. We've had a lot of challenges this year. The conversation around food in prison has been a long-standing challenge that I know our organization, others, Terah, are all working to tackle. So in the face of challenges, whether it's a food or another challenge that you experience, what is it that gives you hope? What brings you hope right now to keep going? And this can be food-related or not food-related, up to you. Terah, let's start with you. What brings you hope?
All right. I think one thing that I'm seeing us trend more in as a society is leaning into the data and the science behind it. The more we see that sort of influencing our policies, the more progress I see take place, right? The effects of eating processed food for X amount of years has this result. Let's not do that no more. Locking people up at the age of 16 with life without possibility of parole sentences counters their brain not being developed, so they weren't even a fully formed adult making a good cognitive decision at the time. Let's create Proposition 57 that allows people to get out, right? So we're seeing a lot of different reforms that are driven by science leading the way. And I get hopeful every time a new report comes out. That's my nighttime reads is let's move this to the next level and implement this and systems change. So science brings me hope.
Say it louder, Terah. Science.
Science.
Leslie, what about you? What brings you hope? What keeps you going?
I think recognizing the tiny moments and tiny changes that are really part of something bigger. Thinking about this specifically, what gives me hope, in the sense of the food in prison work, I keep coming back to this moment recently. We work with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation on a Harvest of the Month program that we've started in partnership with the University of California's Nutrition Policy Institute and Spork Food Hub. And, there was an apricot farm, a small family apricot farm in California that was supposed to sell this huge harvest of apricots to a distributor, which backed out at the last minute. And so this farm had all of these apricots that were about to go to waste. And one of the prison food service managers who we work with saw this on the local news and thought, I have to get these apricots into my prison facility. And he figured it out. He called Spork Food Hub, our food hub partner, and was able to make the transaction and get those apricots into the prisons, which 1, prevented the food waste, 2, supported the family farm, and 3, got apricots, which I don't think have ever shown up on a CDCR tray, into several prisons in the area. And that's one of those things where it's like this tiny little thing, but it shows such a shift in mindset about how people are thinking about what should be on those trays, what can be on those trays, what is possible. So I think gathering all of those little stories and thinking about them as a whole really gives me hope when things feel very difficult.
Thank you so much. That's such an amazing story. So thank you for sharing that. And I love that the apricot, it hit a bunch of things with reducing food waste and providing a delicious fruit to people in prison. So I appreciate the story. All right, Joey, you're gonna end us here. What brings you hope?
It's got so many things. It's people not just like identifying like these large societal problems that usually go unnoticed, but trying to find solutions and like take actions on subjects like we're just talking about right now, food and health in prison. It's completely unnoticed by the community at large for the most part, even though like the food trauma and habits that are results of what goes on behind those walls have like very real effects in our community and to our loved ones. And something else that brings me hope is, just seeing people, like, even though there are like so many dark times, like seeing children like with their optimism and being able to be so unconsciously honest about things that although I may not notice them for the most part, they just shed light on things, and them being our future, and it just gives me hope that they continue on that path and we do have brighter days ahead.
Thank you to all three of you. I'm the one asking questions, so I technically don't get to ask myself the question, but I'm also going to say what brings me hope, I think, for me, is the fact that this report and this book was written, right? I think anytime you're able to shed light on an issue people don't think about that impacts so many people, it means that someone listened enough or someone cared enough to both write it, but also fund it. And also, so I'm hopeful that a book like this exists, that we get to have this conversation. And I'm super hopeful because both of you spent time in the carceral facilities for a really long time, and you're able to talk so well about your experience, and you're both doing work to change that for other people. And so I'm so hopeful by folks like you, and we all know many folks like you all that are doing so much work. So I feel hopeful being in conversation and community with both of you. And then that's Terah and Joey for the both of you. I'm always very grateful to be with Leslie as well as we think about the work that we get to do. So thank all three of you for being here and sharing so much of your experience and your research. I'm going to pivot to a couple of questions that we have from the group. So just a couple of them. The first one's for you, Leslie, which is, from my understanding, the Impact Justice has spearheaded initiatives that are aimed at changing some of the things that you found in the report and the book. Can you talk about what some of those initiatives are and what some of those models have been?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we have a Harvest of the Month program that's operating currently in the California Department of Corrections. We've been able to get all kinds of fresh local produce from small sustainable family farms onto those trays within CDCR. So we've gotten avocados, asparagus, apricots, lemons, all kinds of things onto those trays. And these are things that, would not necessarily be there otherwise. And food service managers have said that they've never served. People who've been incarcerated for decades said they've never had. We did a round of site visits in May and told someone that strawberries were coming up next. And I had a grown man in front of me crying over the fact that he was about to get strawberries because he hadn't had strawberries in 17 years. And, last time I checked, no one ever hurt anyone else with a strawberry. So I think that this is, again, something that's really should be an easy sell, right? We're supporting small family farms. We're supporting environmental sustainability. We're getting fresh, nourishing food to people who deserve it, who might not otherwise have access to it. So that's one program that I think has been really strong. We have a nutrition education workshop program where we've created a trauma-informed nutrition education curriculum that's specifically meant for people who are coming out of incarceration. And that really focuses on, as Terah was talking about, rebuilding that relationship with nourishing your body, rebuilding that relationship with nourishing food, and really focuses on shopping for, selecting, preparing fresh produce and food that is good for you, while dealing with things like lack of time, lack of budget, lack of cooking skills, all of the marketing and the things that are designed to prevent you from getting access to healthy food. Looking at, what do you do when you're living in a community that's impacted by food apartheid and you don't have easy, affordable access to healthy food? So really trying to help people navigate those issues. We've also, tried some different innovative programs. We worked with a company called Brigade that puts chefs into schools and worked with them to put a chef into a prison to see what would happen and learn some really great lessons there of what happens when you put someone with that kind of skill set and mindset into a setting that generally chefs have not been part of. So, really looking at what lessons have we learned from that and what can the next iteration of that be. So those are a few of the programs that we've been working on.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Leslie, you can keep your mute off. The next question is also for you, which is, what's the biggest barrier to prisons accessing nutritious food? Is it cost? Is it policy? What is the barrier?
Thanks for that question to the asker. I think that the biggest barrier, which is the root of the other barriers, again, going back to the idea of attitudes and people being deserving. Because if you believe that people are deserving of good food, you will create policy that reflects that. And you will be willing to have the good food cost whatever real food costs, right? Be willing to allocate that much money to funding. So yes, policy is a huge barrier. Cost is a huge barrier, but those are not insurmountable barriers. And thankfully, neither should attitudes be insurmountable barriers either. But I would hope that as we shift those attitudes and really try and help people shift into this mindset of care, that barriers like policy and cost will become lower, because those are things that we can make clear decisions to do otherwise.
Makes sense. Terah and Joey, you can answer this question. Question is, was there, in your experience in prison, both being inside prison or folks you work with, advocacy from the incarcerated people around food to the prison of any, did that ever exist?
I mean, I was personally advocating. I was submitting a lot of grievances, especially when I also held a culinary job. I discovered that one of the food packages was dog food, and tried to flag this. And it took us about 3 months through the grievance process to get the upper management staff to remove this product from our trays. And before I knew that, obviously, we were really excited that there was a new product, only to learn that it was not, fit for human consumption. So utilizing the internal process of grievances and appeals could sometimes get sort of the relief that we're looking for, but also it gives them an opportunity to sweep it underneath the rug. And so I have to this day no proof that was dog food. But I got a petition signed by over 100 incarcerated individuals alongside me that saw the package and attest to it. So yeah, from the inside out, there is a process, but it also requires a lot of group effort in order to get some progress, some action sort of taking place. And keep in mind, being incarcerated, there's very much so restriction on how you can conduct outcries, to other nonprofits out in the outside world. Our phone calls are monitored, our emails are monitored, and so forth. So it's very difficult to sort of expose what insidious conditions are taking place inside. But we try our best. I know I did. What about you, Joey?
Yeah, so there was a grievance process for us, and it was a very slow moving process. Much like your experience, a lot of the things do get swept under the rug. Even if you make it to the end, they go, well, we already changed the process, so it's dismissed. right? It's a very internal process. And what Leslie spoke on earlier about accountability, there's very little accountability, and like we're incarcerated. So it was difficult to use Aishatu's words, mobilize, because I've seen people get transferred, seen people's lives get turned upside down because, you know, they were trying to shed a light on something that they didn't want to light shed on. And next thing you know, you're on the other side of the state in a different prison on a 6-month bus ride because they're just transferring you nonstop for 6 months because you're trying to like just get basic human rights. So, I mean, there are movements going on inside. People do like try to take action, but it's really doing it as thoughtfully and carefully as possible because there is retaliation.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned retaliation. Go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, not to mention the food strikes, like taking food strikes, not purchasing the canteen. We do our best to try to mobilize inside and advocate. But sometimes it's more about just creating that noise so that we are capturing the attention of like local news stations and so on. But I want to just place emphasis on the title of the book. It's like ending the hidden punishment of food in prison. And that is absolutely what we experienced, was food as punishment, leveraging that to either take our trays away or make sure the food is cold, overcooked and undercooked. We were provided for, but what we were given was oftentimes a message of punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should do. And then lastly, and I'm done.
So
I know we're up on time, but it is not lost on me, for everyone that's listening and attending, that we are talking about food when customarily, like Pacific Standard Time, we're having lunch right now. And so I just want to like lift that up and say how food for thought and food in our bodies is just a huge nod to this issue. And Aishatu, you, Leslie, Alex Buzansky, what you guys have done has already made huge waves in the prison spaces. And I'm getting a lot of reports from incarcerated friends that are really happy to see some of the things that are coming through on their trays. So thank you.
That's really great to hear. Susan Burton talked to us, and she's talked about gray-green beans, and I think that's a part of like the food as punishment conversation. So I'm so glad you're getting reports of better food for people. So we're only at 1 minute, so I'm gonna have the last question be for Leslie, which really is, we have a lot of folks that are watching today, a lot of folks that have picked up the book, a lot of folks that have talked to us, our social media channels, sent us emails. So Leslie, what can people do watching to help change the reality of food in prison?
The first thing that I'll ask that folks do is help us raise awareness about this issue. So tonight at the dinner table or sometime this weekend, ask someone, hey, have you ever thought about the issue of food in prison? And just start the conversation. If you can teach one person about this issue and how important it is, you're helping us grow that movement. Number two, if you know someone who has a loved one on the inside, or you have a loved one on the inside, help support that person, make sure that they're able to eat. If you can put money on someone's books, or if you've got friends who are struggling because they're trying to put money on a loved one's books, like bring them a nice meal, or bake them cookies, as Joey would probably do. Make sure share that food with someone to make sure that gets passed on to someone on the inside. And the third, ask the folks who are doing this work. At Impact Justice, we're doing this work. We've got lots of partner organizations that are really trying to do this work. Ask those of us who are involved what you can do to help. Sometimes donations, if you can, are always great to help us continue the work, but also, there's plenty of other kinds of expertise that are really welcome in these spaces. And anyone who wants to be part of this movement, I guarantee we can find a place for you and whatever your skills are or whatever you're able to do to help us push this movement forward. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Really appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Joey. Thank you so much, Terah, for being here with us. Leslie, thank you so much for writing this book and for being such an advocate and a voice for this work that we're doing. If you all have questions, you know how to reach us. Please grab a book and we'll see you later. Thank you.